The Civilizational Project, New Beginnings and the Possibility of a Mesoamerican Revival. In some way, we have to define and put into practice a new national program for the future. The risk of not doing so would be to accelerate internal breakdown and accentuate existing contradictions. It would encourage centrifugal forces which detract from the very concept of an independent nation. Mexico as a country continues to be viable because of its expanse, the size of its population, its productive potential, and, above all, the cultural resources that its people have been wise enough to conserve. It is viable, but it may not be so in the future. Its viability is threatened if the new national program is built along the margins of our national reality, ignoring the historical and civilizational processes that are still operating and that have a deep history. A new plan for nationhood cannot be made up of shreds and patches. It cannot be the sum total of particular measures that, under pressure from the crisis, attempt to attenuate each of the multiple and different manifestations of the previous model's breakdown. The only option, without doubt a difficult and arduous one, but nevertheless the only possibility, is to draw from the Mexico Profundo the historical will to formulate and undertake our own civilizational project. What do we have as a basis going forward? Indian peoples have resisted 5 centuries of colonial oppression and domination. On what interior strength have they drawn to persist for centuries in their own vision of life, under conditions incomparably more difficult than those that in a few years destroyed the development plans of the imaginary Mexico? The spiritual force behind the will to endure is indispensable for formulating a new, viable, and authentic national program. The country already counts on social groups that know how to employ and develop aspects of Western culture that they have made their own. We have scientists and technicians, artists and intellectuals, and they control knowledge and Western skills which are useful today and will be in the future. The West has generated cultural elements as a function of its own project, but that does not mean that these elements are only useful there. Other civilizational projects, like the one we need, can also make use of them without changing their nature. As we have seen throughout this work, local societies on a relatively small scale, hamlets, communities, villages, and neighborhoods, are the social systems that have made possible the continuity of the Mexico Profundo. It is in the heart of such groups that Mesoamerican civilization is lived daily and its cultural matrices preserved. All the cultural processes that for 500 years have been dedicated to the resistance and survival of the Mexico Profundo may now be reoriented toward the renovation and development of local cultures. This process will originate internally and not be imposed from outside. Nevertheless, the communities, at their own discretion, will be able to make use of many of the cultural elements that today belong only to the dominant society. The communities have been prevented access to those elements by the system of domination and exclusion, or it may be that the elements have been rejected because there was an attempt to impose them as part of the same system. The recovery of cultural control will diametrically change the situation. If in fact one wants to promote a national pluralism project, the process requires resolutely intensifying actions to recover local cultures and bring them into the project. One of the key points will be broad and intensive training of new community figures capable of making use of the opportunities created by the recovery of cultural control. However, this new training must not uproot them or lead them to reject their culture. The new figures, cultural promoters in the broadest sense of the term, should be trained to value their culture and from that perspective to promote the critical appropriation of foreign cultural elements. Here, the effort would be to see the West from the viewpoint of the community and stop seeing the community from the perspective of the West. To this point, I have placed the emphasis on the local community, the fundamental nucleus of the Mexico Profundo and the indispensable unit of support for a national pluralism project. But cultural revitalization of the communities is not enough to foment a civilizational process, because this involves other levels of state organization. I have mentioned several times that one of the most destructive effects of colonial domination was the reduction of the social sphere of Mesoamerican civilization to the narrow limits of the local community. The goal is not just to recover a village-level civilization, but to reconstruct the necessary cultural space to develop a modern civilization, valid today and into the future. It is essential to restructure broader levels of social organization to assure the flourishing of Mesoamerican cultures. Respect for the right of local self-determination is different from respect for the right to organize at higher levels in the political structure. Many projects cannot be carried out within the limited framework of the local community because they require participation and cultural resources that go beyond those limits. When all is said and done, what we are speaking about is civilization. It is at the level of civilization that one measures the transcendence of the problems and recognizes the capacities and potentials of a people. It is there, in the civilizational project, that the fundamental information is to be found for designing the nation we want and are able to build in each historical period.